Whatever reason, right? But your husband can't get a little action during the day when you just sit here and act like yes, it does. It has everything to do with it. It has everything for you to sit here and pray. Look at me when I talk to you. Music, applause, music, applause, music, applause, music, applause, music, magical. That's the word we use. But what does it really mean? Adults say magical to describe something surreal, something that doesn't quite fit into logical language. A glowing sky, a haunting melody, a child's drawing of a flying cat with human eyes, a dream that felt more real than waking life. I remember when I was about 4 years old and went to play school, there was a girl in my class who carried a small school bag. On the front of that bag there was a cartoonish figure, some kind of creature flying freely in the open blue sky. I used to stare at that image for a very long time. I don't know why, but I felt something. I used to imagine being him flying endlessly through the sky, through his eyes, through my imagination. It wasn't just a fantasy. It felt real, like I was that creature soaring through an infinite world, weightless, timeless, unburdened. Looking back now, I think that was the closest I've ever come to enlightenment. That feeling, pure, innocent, limitless. It was like being one with the entire sky. I still remember the face of that little creature to this day. Magical. Magical is just our word for something we used to know intimately and then forgot. It's not fantasy, it's memory. When an adult watches a movie that makes their skin tingle or hears a song that feels like it's from another world, they call it magical. But that world isn't made up. It's a remembered place from before memory had words. It's a longing for a perception we once lived in every day. That's the irony. We use the word magical to describe the realest reality we've ever known. The world is seen through the eyes of a child before the ego, before identity, before we knew what anything was supposed to be. It's not just nostalgia. It's a psychic echo from a time when every object shimmered with possibility. As infants, we lived in that state. There were no definitions, no categories, no labels to ruin wonder. Everything was new, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it hadn't yet been reduced to a name. The front door wasn't just the door to the hallway. It could be the gateway to a forest where trees could talk. The kitchen chair wasn't just a chair, it was a throne. A puddle wasn't water, it was a portal. The world wasn't flat, it wasn't ordinary. It glowed because it hadn't yet been cut into pieces by language. The ego had not yet formed. There was no me in the world, there was only experience. No border between the inner and outer. No I am this and that is that. Everything was alive. Everything belonged. This is the infant dreamscape. This is where magic was never questioned, because it was the default. And so as adults, we try to return to it without even realizing. That's why we create stories where animals sing and objects have souls. That's why myths and fairy tales still move us. That's why we cry at music with no lyrics, because it bypasses the ego and touches the part of us before we knew who we were. We write novels about children entering other worlds through wardrobes and rabbit holes, because part of us remembers a time when every hallway, every staircase, every dark room felt like a mystery waiting to open. Magical is the closest word we have to name that state. It's a longing for the unfiltered, for the impossible that once felt natural, for the mystical landscape that didn't need proof to be real, for the time before conclusions existed. And so every possibility was alive. It's not childish to see the world this way. It's primal. It is the mind before it's fallen to certainty. It is the dream of the soul before it was claimed by the world. One day the living room is a jungle. The next, it's a kingdom. The crib is a spaceship. The closet a doorway to something they both long for and fear. The imagination isn't added on top of reality. It is reality. Nothing has yet been reduced to just what it is. Everything still glows. But this dreamscape is delicate. It bends and flows like a stream until something sharp disturbs its waters. When the home is safe, this dream becomes a sanctuary. The dreamscape is full of warm sounds, glowing smiles, voices that soothe, and arms that protect. Music, but if a child feels unsafe, if a parent yells or disappears, if a stranger touches in a way they shouldn't, if love is withdrawn or pain is inflicted, then the magical realm cracks. The door to Narnia doesn't open to mess, it opens to nightmares. The forest becomes haunted, the sky turns gray, and the dream, the very world they live in, becomes an unspeakable place, because they don't yet know what's real and what isn't. They can't know. Their psyche is still a sponge still forming. So if terror enters the dream, they absorb it. If betrayal enters the dream, they become it. If something violent or chaotic happens, they don't think this is wrong. They think this is how the world works. And in that way, trauma in early childhood doesn't just hurt, it rewrites reality. It distorts the architecture of the dream itself. A parent who disappears often becomes a ghost in the child's dreams. A scream that echoed through the hallway might become thunder in their nightmares. A slap can become a monster's claw. The abuser becomes a shape-shifting shadow that follows them into adulthood. Many adults don't remember their trauma, not because it wasn't real, but because it was too much for their forming mind to name. Instead, it was stored in symbols, stored in dreams, stored in fears they don't understand, in patterns they keep repeating, in the constant illness, the insomnia, the anxiety without a cause. When the dreamscape turns into a horror movie, the body keeps the record. The nervous system stays on high alert. The mind loops in confusion. The child who once danced through dream fields now wakes up at 3 a.m., heart racing, drowning in sweat and fear. Why? Because the subconscious never forgets. This is where fever dreams enter the picture. Not just random spikes of the imagination during sickness, but literal eruptions of the unresolved past. A whisper of truth breaking through the body when the mind is too clouded to remember. And what do these dreams say? They show the child again, lost, alone, in a world that shifts beneath their feet. They run through staircases that twist into nowhere. They try to scream but have no mouth. They look in mirrors and don't recognize the face. This is the unspoken scream of a mind that never got the chance to understand. A child doesn't say, "I'm traumatized." They say, "I'm a monster. I'm not real. I must be bad. I don't know what's going on, but it must be my fault." And as adults, they forget the dream. But the dream doesn't forget them. The same doorway that once led to a land of singing animals now opens into a hallway of shadows. Faces morph, objects twist, time becomes distorted. The dreamscape cracks into psychic chaos. I've been trying to make a video on this for a long time now, but I didn't know how to put it into words. How do you take someone into the dreamscape of an infant, into the horror and confusion that fluctuates with every move of a parent? This part of the journey, this abyss, it came to me in my own stage of inner work. When I finally reached the last layer of psychological and physical suppression, I had vivid dreams about my childhood, but they weren't memories I could recall. They were felt experiences, and they were terrifying. In one dream, I was dancing as a child, but I didn't know who I was. Nothing made sense. The world was unrecognizable. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was happening. It was just raw confusion, pure chaos, a kind of psychological horror that no child should ever feel. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a dream. It was the subconscious memory of the loss of control I felt as a child, that deep sense of helplessness. Because when you're a child, an infant even, and you grow up in an unsafe environment, you don't know what's going to happen next. Every shadow, every loud voice, every slammed door becomes a monster in your head. You can't understand what's going on. You can't process it. You just feel it. And that feeling becomes a loop inside your nervous system. It becomes your baseline. That's how trauma gets stored, not in the mind, but in the body, in the subconscious. And that's why so many of us get physically sick, because that psychological confusion, the horror, it wants a way out. It starts showing up as fever dreams, as insomnia, as physical symptoms we don't know how to explain. I remember nights when I couldn't sleep as a kid, not because of bad habits, but because my own thoughts were haunting me. I didn't even know what the world was, and yet I was already drowning in it. By the time we grow up, these memories are so far out of reach, we don't even comprehend they happened. They're like ghosts trapped in the walls of our childhood home, silent but ever present. And then we wonder why we feel broken, why we sabotage ourselves, why we get triggered by things we can't even name. It's because the child inside us never had a chance to make sense of any of it. And so I looped again and again. This is what trauma looks like before language. It doesn't leave a memory. It leaves an impression, a feeling, a fever, a fragmentation. The infant does not think this is abuse. They feel I am unsafe, I am confused, I am wrong, I must be wrong. This is not metaphor. This is how the subconscious records reality before the mind knows how to record facts. And when those fractured dreams are not resolved, they live on not just as vague memories, but as literal illness in the body, in the immune system, in the patterns of insomnia, anxiety, dissociation, and autoimmune storms later in life. Many adults think their depression, fatigue, or nightmares are from stress, but they're not. They're from the ancient dream still running in the basement of the soul where the child still doesn't know who they are, or what's happening, or how to wake up. The dreamscape becomes a haunted realm, and the child never fully leaves it. They grow up, yes, but part of them is still trapped there, still 5 years old, still scared, still dancing in circles trying to make sense of a scream. And this is where shadow work begins. Because the shadow is not just your bad habits or repressed anger. It is the story you were never allowed to tell. It's the dream that never got witnessed. It's the horror you couldn't name, so your body named it for you with shaking, with panic, with disease, with exhaustion, with addiction. In dream analysis, especially the kind used in depth psychology and Jungian therapy, we see this. Dreams aren't just random. They are screams encoded in symbols. You may dream of a collapsing house, a child crying in a corner, a face with no mouth, a parent turning into a monster. These are not creative. They are literal psychic truths that have not yet been digested. You may have a fever and in the haze see yourself as a child, but in a twisted world. You try to speak, but your voice won't work. You try to move, but the walls melt. Everything becomes a looping, surreal confusion. This is not madness. This is memory. It is the body, soul, and mind all trying desperately to finally wake up the child still trapped in the nightmare. And here's the most terrifying part. Most people never know this happened. They don't even remember the trauma, because trauma at that early stage never entered the brain as words. It entered as atmosphere. That's why they don't remember the facts, but they live the patterns. They date people who mirror the instability. They fear joy because it reminds them of the moment before the scream. They have chronic symptoms no doctor can explain, and the child within still dances, still reaches out, still hopes the door will lead back to magic. But until that dreamscape is entered again, consciously it remains a forgotten theater, looping its horror in the background. Night after night, symptom after symptom, fear after fear.